When Nazi Germany capitulated in May 1945, more than 100 U-boats were still patrolling the oceans. In the days that followed, they began surfacing in quiet European ports. Their long campaign finally ended. What happened next was without precedent. Hundreds of submarines were seized, examined, and intentionally destroyed. This is the story of what became of the U-boats after World War II. Surrender and the immediate aftermath. On 8 May 1945, Germany accepted unconditional defeat. Within hours, Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's successor and former head of the U-boat arm, issued a historic straightforward command. All submarines must cease operations, rise to the surface, and surrender to the nearest Allied authority. The long struggle beneath the Atlantic had come to an end. Across the North Atlantic, the Bay of Biscay, and the Norwegian fjords, more than 150 submarines emerged, their worn-out crews raising white flags as Allied aircraft, watched from above. They headed for ports such as Loch Eriboll in Scotland, Lissahalli in Northern Ireland, and Portland in southern England, each arrival marking the quiet dissolution of the once fearsome Wolfpack fleet that had stalked Allied shipping. The surrender process was rigorously organised. Allied warships shepherded the U-boats into harbour, where Royal Navy and US Navy teams boarded them, seized codes, charts and weapons, and inspected the battered vessels, many barely afloat after months submerged. At Loch Eriboll alone, nearly 40 U-boats lay at anchor, a sombre display of defeat. The logistics were immense, involving the towing and securing of submarines from all over occupied Europe. A few boats never arrived, either deliberately scuttled or lost to mechanical failure on the way. In the weeks that followed, Allied leaders confronted a pressing dilemma: what to do with the most advanced submarine fleet in the world. The United States and Britain recognized enormous intelligence value in the cutting-edge Type Feintwind and Feintithrace designs, while the Soviet Union, entering the early Cold War, demanded access to captured technology. Meanwhile, the German crews spent long months in captivity. Some underwent interrogation for technical knowledge, especially those familiar with new propulsion or torpedo innovations. Others simply languished in camps, unsure of their futures. By late 1945, most had been returned to a defeated, divided Germany. By year's end, ports from Trondheim to Portsmouth were crowded with surrendered submarines. What followed, Operation Deadlight, would ensure that most of these vessels never sailed again. Operation Deadlight and the scuttling of the fleet. By autumn 1945, the Allies had assembled over 100 surrendered U-boats in British ports. Maintaining them was expensive, and indefinite storage was unrealistic. The Royal Navy therefore authorised Operation Deadlight, a plan to tow the captured boats into the Atlantic and sink them. Between November 1945 and February 1946, this quiet undertaking would wipe out most of the Kriegsmarine's undersea force. The logistics were formidable. In total, 156 submarines had surrendered, with 116 assigned for disposal under Deadlight. The Royal Navy designated 3 scuttling zones, XX, YY and ZD, roughly 100 to 120 nautical miles northwest of Ireland. There, the submarines would be sunk by naval gunfire, explosive charges, or simply by opening their sea valves. The first phase began in November 1945, as Royal Navy tugs started pulling groups of submarines from Scottish and Irish ports. Many boats, however, were in dreadful condition. Some had spent months at sea without maintenance, others were damaged by Allied attacks or internal sabotage. Their ballast tanks leaked, engines were seized, and their hulls were weakened by corrosion. In rough winter seas, towing these unstable wrecks proved dangerous. As a result, more than a third of the U-boats never reached the scuttling areas. 56 sank en route, pulled under by turbulent weather or structural collapse. The Royal Navy recorded each loss but made no effort to salvage them. Deadlight's goal was destruction, not preservation. Once on site, destroyers and frigates completed the task, sometimes using aerial rockets or naval guns to speed the sinking. Among the doomed vessels was U-2336, the last U-boat to sink Allied ships during the war. It surrendered at Lisahalli in June 1945 and was deliberately sunk off Ireland in January 1946. Another, U-295, met its fate on 17 December 1945 after being towed from Loch Ryan. Not all submarines were destroyed. The most advanced examples, the Type 21 and Type 23, were kept for study. These represented the future of submarine design, featuring streamlined hulls and superior underwater endurance. British and American. Engineers examined several in detail, reverse engineering their features to inform their own post-war fleets. U-2511, Germany's only fully operational Type 21 at the war's end, was scuttled last on 7 February 1946, marking the official close of Operation Deadlight. For decades, the Deadlight wrecks rested unnoticed on the seabed. Then, between 2001 and 2003, maritime archaeologist Innes McCartney led expeditions that located many of them. Using sonar and deep-sea imaging, his team identified at least 14 intact hulls preserved in the cold Atlantic silt. Their findings showed how hastily the operation was carried out. Many boats sank upright, their decks still armed, their steel shells coated in marine life and time. Operation Deadlight achieved its aim, the physical erasure of Hitler's submarine fleet. Yet it left behind an unintended legacy, a sprawling underwater graveyard across the North Atlantic, a silent reminder of the end of Germany's undersea war, transfer, reuse, and Allied naval service. While most U-boats were sunk in the Atlantic, a select number survived. For the Allies, these submarines were more than trophies. They were technological templates that could reshape underwater warfare. Between 1945 and 1948, dozens of captured boats were retained, repaired, or handed out among the victors, becoming test subjects in the early Cold War. To oversee this process, the Tripartite Naval Commission, established in August 1945, allocated surrendered submarines to the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. Each received 10 U-boats for examination, with priority given to the advanced Type 21 and Type 23 designs. Their streamlined shapes, larger batteries, and snorkel-equipped systems represented a revolution, submarines engineered to operate primarily underwater rather than on the surface. In Britain, the Royal Navy incorporated several into testing programs. U-3217, renamed HMS N41, underwent submerged trials and endurance tests before being scrapped in 1949. Others, like U-190, surrendered off Newfoundland and were placed into Canadian service as training platforms for sonar and torpedo drills. The Royal Navy also used captured hulls to improve depth charge tactics, detonating live explosives near real German steel instead of mock targets. The United States showed similar interest. Captured submarines were analysed extensively at facilities in Portsmouth and New London. U.S. submarine force crews studied propulsion methods, quiet running technologies, and periscope systems, features that would later shape America's first post-war submarine classes. One particularly notable vessel, U-234, was seized on 14 May 1945 while en route to Japan with a secret cargo including uranium oxide and jet engine parts. U.S. Navy engineers examined its structure and payload before sinking it during weapons tests in 1947. Other navies across Europe also received their share. The Soviet Union acquired several Type 20 boats, which became direct models for the later Whiskey-class submarines. Soviet shipyards dismantled German hulls piece by piece, replicating their pressure-resistant construction and snorkel systems, giving the Soviet fleet a sudden technological boost. For the West, it was alarming. The same German designs that once threatened Allied convoys were now propelling a new arms race under the Arctic ice. Smaller nations benefited as well. France, rebuilding its navy after occupation, received several boats from Allied stocks. One of them, U-123, served for years under a new flag before retirement. Norway operated others for coastal defence and training, while Denmark incorporated German submarine technology into its post-war shipbuilding. Yet the redistribution of U-boats was not purely technical. It also became an early symbol of post-war geopolitics. Britain and the United States hoped that sharing German technology would help maintain balance among the Allies. Yet as the Soviet Union expanded its submarine force, cooperation quickly shifted toward rivalry. The U-boats had changed hands, but their strategic value persisted. By the late 1940s, most of the retained submarines had fulfilled their purpose and were either scuttled or dismantled. Still, their technical influence endured. The innovations of the type Vechtutins, its hydrodynamics, batteries and underwater speed, became the blueprint for nearly every conventional submarine built in the 1950s. In a sense, Germany's final wartime innovation became the foundation of the nuclear age submarine: survivors, museums, and legacy. Although hundreds of U-boats were destroyed or broken up, a few escaped that fate and began new lives. These survivors, scattered across Europe and North America, shifted from instruments of war to objects of remembrance. Among the most famous is U-995, which surrendered in May 1945 at Trondheim. It later served briefly in the Norwegian Navy before being returned to Germany in 1965. Today it stands at La Boe near Kiel as a museum ship beside the Marine Ehrenmal Memorial. Visitors who enter its cramped interior experience the tight quarters where 45 men once lived, worked, and fought for weeks. In France, several captured U-boats were used by the post-war Navy. U-123, renamed Blason, became one of the rare submarines to see regular peacetime duty. After its retirement, it was preserved in Lorient, once a major U-boat base. Other survivors rest in unusual locations. U-534, raised from the Kattegat Strait in 1993, is exhibited in Birkenhead, England, its hull cut into sections to expose its claustrophobic interior. Across the Atlantic, the United States preserved one iconic boat, U-505, captured intact in June 1944. After serving as an intelligence asset, it was eventually transferred to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. It remains there today, meticulously restored, the first enemy warship ever publicly displayed on American soil. But most U-boats never reached museums. The deadlight wrecks remain scattered across the seabed off Northwest Ireland, forming one of the world's largest submarine graveyards. For decades they were forgotten, known only from Royal Navy charts. Public interest in the U-boats, however, has continued to grow. Museums in Hamburg, Kiel and Larbo attract thousands of visitors each year, while historians still examine the tactics, experiences and technology behind these steel vessels. For veterans and scholars alike, the submarines are more than artifacts. They embody the human cost beneath the waves. More than 30,000 German submariners, along with countless Allied sailors, never returned. The machines that once represented stealth and efficiency now symbolize loss, innovation, and memory. Today, the preserved U-boats and the wrecks resting below the Atlantic serve as parallel memorials, one above the surface, one below, telling the final chapter of Germany's submarine fleet, an empire of steel now lying silent between history and the sea. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you may also like what happened to Germany's weapons and tanks after World War II. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell for more WW2 Chronicles.